Oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
I'm in the area of Martin County known as the Islands. In 1957, one of E.J. Hayes High School former students came down here to pick up one of his classmates, and they were going back to A&T University. He didn't know that it was a group of sheriff department people here waiting for him, because they had heard a black man was going to meet a white woman in this area. And since this car was just like the man they thought was coming, they opened fire on Joe Cross, an E.J. Hayes graduate who worked part-time at Virginia Beach and other places so he could finance his college education. And he was home one weekend, and he came to pick up another student who went to Hayes and was at that time going to A&T University. And this is where he met his death. He was shot more than one time. The sheriff of Martin County and a group of his deputies were involved. This is one of the tragic moments that happened during a time when African Americans were shot at will.
We're here today to discuss the Civil Rights Movement of 1963 and on in Williamston, North Carolina.
Tell us what a freedom fighter is.
A freedom fighter is a person or persons that are participating in the Civil Rights Movement, and they're fighting for justices and freedom. They normally consistently come to meetings, they march. When we march, we have sit-ins, we have boycotts, we do things that would bring freedom to, at the time we were called Negroes.
And you were a freedom fighter?
Yes, I was a freedom fighter.
Now, how did you become a freedom fighter?
Well, actually, I was sort of tricked into it by Mother. Jimmy and I were outside playing one day, and she called us in, and she was all excited about this big meeting that was coming up. And at this meeting, we were going to be marching. And for us, marching was like a parade, or the Elks are having their march or something like that, big bands. So we got excited too. Then we agreed that we would go because we wanted to go see what it was all about. And the next day, we went down to Reverend Carter's church. When we got there, it was about 7 to 10 young people that were there, along with 2 men that we didn't know. We knew Reverend Carter, but the other 2 we didn't know. And before it was over, we found out it was Mr. Golden Frinks, who turned out to be our field secretary leader, and Reverend Lagarde, who became our minister of music during that time.
Were there others like, as brave or as daring?
Oh, yeah. It was Miss Hattie, Mary Louise Mobley, Ella Mae Almond, Robert Purvis, John Small, Annette Lanier, Alma Freeman, Jackie Bond. Yeah, that crew.
Was their function different? Or?
Yes, they were more like in front. They were the leaders. They were the adults.
Mm-hmm.
Mr.
Who were in the back?
Nope. Mr. Frinks and Mama led.
Okay.
And behind them would be the youth leaders. And we marched 2 by 2s.
Mm-hmm.
So you could say, and right behind them would be, say, Vina Hodges and John Small and Jackie Bonds and Annette Lanier, Alma Freeman and Robert Purvis. And then the rest of us fell in the back. And they were youth leaders because they led us. We were behind them.
All right.
In the marches, and they would call certain calls, like if we're going to go and boycott someplace or picket, they would strategize with the older leaders, and then when we come to meet, then we would be informed.
So was there any consequence for like not going where you're supposed to go? Or
well, later when we were trying to go into, say, the Griffin Quick Lunch, which was one of the second places we went to try to integrate. Mm-hmm. And at that time, it was about 7 or 8 freedom fighters that went in, and we were already lined up. So as one group was arrested, the next group would go in. Mm-hmm. And this particular day, they went in and sat down, but they weren't offered any service. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, they were being threatened for just coming in there, sitting down. But the owner told them, don't touch him, according to John Small, who was one of the first ones to go in there at that time, said, don't hit him with the ketchup bottles and the hot sauce bottles. That's what they want you to do. So they called the police instead. Well, as the police was racking out one group, another group would go in. They take out their group, and they were piling us into cars like sardines. So after we got out, then the other proprietors who we could have gone and sat in with started locking their doors when they saw us, including Griffin Quick Lunch. We never got back in there either. Okay. But the very first place we went was Watts Theater. And a young lady by the name of Brenda Williams, who was our secretary, was the first one to the window to purchase a ticket. And of course, the guy wouldn't allow her to purchase the ticket. So then she has to speak to his manager. We were all there in line. In the event she got a ticket, we were all going to purchase. But we were told if they didn't sell us tickets, sit where we stood. And that was our first sit-in, was we blocked the entrance of the theater. So we couldn't go in and nobody else could either. And of course we were arrested for that. But all arrests did not result in jail time. Mm-hmm. Initially. But what started the jail time was the town created an ordinance where we couldn't march without a permit. See, prior to that, we were able to march. But you could only gather so many together and march or go through town.
Did you know these people, or were they just doing it out of the goodness of their
heart?
Well,
Mrs. Peel owned a local store right on the corner of the street that we lived on. So she was very familiar with the black community because they were the ones that purchased from her. Mm-hmm. They patronized her. Mm-hmm. There was a place called the Shamrock that served food, but it wouldn't allow black people to come in and eat, sit down and eat. There was a motel called the Breezewood. They wouldn't allow black people to come in and spend the night. The only place I remember that had a Hotel for Colors was in Windsor, North Carolina. And so there was the Breezewood, there was the Shamrock for eating, there was the Griffin Quick Lunch, there was the R&C. R&C would pass our food through a window. They sell to us, but they wouldn't allow us to come in. And as
the same price?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, maybe more. I'm pretty sure it was about at the same price. So that's what we decide on what days we'd go, what we would do, where we would pick it. They decided when we would boycott downtown Williamston to make it hurt the proprietors. So those were the things they talked about. And then, of course, he had to get a lot of things cleared through Dr. King.
Okay, so everything was funneled through him.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where they came up with the strategies from? Did they, it was like a think tank for?
Oh yeah, it was well. Theirs was more of a think tank. Remember, Mama was a Christian, and she did a whole lot of praying, asking for guidance.
Okay.
So as she got answers revealed to her, she would share them with the rest of the group, like Mr. Franks, Mrs. Mobley, Francis King, and perhaps a few of the youth leaders that happened to be there. And one time the Lord told her to go in front of the SMV and we just stand there and sing. Well, little known to us that he had to show us how he was protecting us. And we're standing out there just singing and singing. And if you miss me from my table at home, you can't find me nowhere. Just come on over to the Shamrock and I'll be eating over there. And they sent a mosquito truck by. And they blew the mosquito dust on us, they thought. And miraculously, a light wind came and lifted it right over our heads. No one coughed. No one missed a beat. And we kept on singing praises. We were thanking God for, I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved. Just like a tree planted by the water, I shall not be moved. Green Memorial was located down the hill.
Okay.
The church.
Okay.
So in order for us to get to City Hall or any other place, we'd have to come up steps and go up the hill to do our demonstrations. But this time they had made up their mind they weren't going to let us pass the steps. They're law enforcement. So they blocked us from coming in. And that night, everybody just sat down. And so if you're not going to let us by, we're not going back to the church.
I'm sorry, how did they block you?
They stood across
They just stood, okay. So these were police officers?
Law enforcement, because remember, it wasn't only police, it was sheriffs as well.
Oh.
So the sheriff's office was involved as well.
Huh.
So they stood across and wouldn't allow us to go by. And we sat down, and they stood. So Mama, Sarah Small, and the sheriff came to a compromise. And the compromise was, if you leave, we'll leave. In other words, he'd take his group and leave, and she'll take her group and leave. And it had to be one thing I remember so vividly in my mind. There was this fellow named Joe Carney Brown. And the harder they hit him to make him run, the slower he walked. I admired that because it was like, I'm not going to allow, you can take away physical, but you cannot manage my mind. And he walked slowly, and they beat him pretty bad in his back. They just beat him and beat him. And I witnessed that with my eyes. That to me made me look at him as a different type of person. I didn't know he had that kind of strength in him to do that. Because everybody was running, including guys, It wasn't like all the guys were tough, they were running too. That I remember is the standoff we had at the schoolyard. We were going to march from the school down to City Hall. And somehow the law enforcement found out about it. And there was a railroad track that went across the main street. So, to block us from marching, they sent the train down the track and then it stopped. So we couldn't get by. other leaders were going to march anyway if they had to go around the train. So at this time they had cattle prods and billy clubs. And a couple of people got cattle prodded that day. My brother John was telling me that they took 2 cattle prods and put them in one of our youth leaders' abdominals, her stomach, and her name was Jackie Barnes, and he said those cattle prods were so powerful that they knocked her off her feet. And he cattle prod Reverend Carter, remember me telling you about him, and another lady.
I don't think one set group of people should always be the ones to say what's good and what's bad. I see America like I would a bowl of soup. And in a bowl of vegetable soup, you see peas, potatoes, tomatoes, carrots. You see all kinds of vegetables. And every vegetable in the bowl, in the pot, pulls off a substance. And when it's finished, the peas come up peas, the potatoes come up potatoes, but you got a good soup. And I think the country limps because somebody's missing, and it's us. We are that untouched resource.